All set.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're here today for a work session with the Rochester Police Department. Today, we're joined by Councilmember Kim Smith, Councilmember Willie Lightfoot, Councilmember Mitch Gruber, and Vice President Mary Lupien and myself. And today's discussion will include information on the Executive Order 203, as well as an update on asset forfeiture funds. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commander LaFave to lead us off and introduce anyone on the RPD side if you'd like.
Good afternoon, everybody. For this particular portion for the EO 203, it'd be myself and Deputy Chief of Administration, Chief Dwyer. I'll probably be doing most of the speaking on this as I was the project manager for this over the last few months.
Hi, everyone. I just would like to let you know that the interpreters are trying to get things settled on our end. I don't know if you want to wait a minute or go ahead.
Yeah, we can wait a moment. Sorry about that.
Okay, that's okay. I'm sorry.
Please let us know when you're ready.
You can go ahead.
Thank you. Commander LaFave, the floor is yours.
Okay. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll try to be brief. And the reason that I'm going to try to be brief is that the EO 203 was a very comprehensive plan, and there was 96, or there was 11 different categories broken down to 103 different action items off of that. It was quite comprehensive. So over the course of many months, I was able to break it down into 11 categories. And what I did is I took each category and I blocked it off into action items that needed to be complete. Now, not all of these action items were specific to RPD. So I'm going to limit this discussion to RPD items. And if there's any follow-up questions, I can explain kind of where I am. And this summary is kind of a draft. So please don't hold me to the letter of the law on this because it is so large and so robust, and some of the items actually flow back and forth or merge with other concepts. So that's why there might be a few different discrepancies here and there. So I'm happy to explain. So the 11 different categories. Accountability had 7 action items. Community engagement and programming had 3. Data technology and transparency was one of the biggest ones, and one of the ones that was the most expensive from a price standpoint as far as budgeting. There was 25 action items. Fostering a community-oriented culture, there were 4 action items. Officer wellness consisted of 10. Police strategies, policies, and practices were 24 action items. Resizing the RPD, there were 3. Response to mental health calls, there were 4. RPD recruitment, there were 6 action items. Training, there were 16. And violence prevention, there was 1 action item. So how does this shape as far as the RPD is concerned? As of right now, as of today, February 9th, 2022, there were 103 action items from the 11 reform recommendations. So RPD is responsible in full or partially responsible for 83 out of the 103 action items. So they're kind of broken down into different categories, but completed, in progress, other agency assigned, if it's a long-term project, or if it's legal or requires further explanation. So of the completed items at this time, 42 action items out of the 83 are already completed by the RPD. 14 of these action items are in progress. Most of these items will be completed by the end of the third quarter of 2021. On other agencies assigned, there's an additional 21 action items that are not RPD. Most of these fall under the purview of City Hall or other agencies. Skipping over here, there were other action items, like specifically that fell under a legal category that were essentially out of the purview of the RPD. There were also 4 that were kind of vague, and they're more of a statement, and they really didn't allow a lot of interpretation as far as an actual action plan. So as far as where we stand right now, of the 78 items solely for RPD, 56 of them, of the 78, are either completed or in progress. And there's still 22 outlying items out of the 78 that still need to be completed. And one of the reasons why they're not be completed was either there's not funding for it, or they're just a long-term project that's going to require funding and long-term implementation.
Yeah, Commander LaFave, of the in progress, Councilmember Lightfoot pointed out, I believe that's supposed to say 2022, third quarter 2022.
Yes.
Yep. Okay. Just want to make sure it's clarified.
Commander LaFave, is there a list? It's great to have the total number, but is there a list of the items for each category that you have it broken out here?
So right now, I have a list of completed items for the RPD. That's like a 9-page Word document, because these recommendations were very lengthy, and even like just a single bullet point required lots of documentation. Now, I do also have it broken down, the items that are not RPD specific. I do have those that I could forward to you as well, if you'd like to take a look at them. And there is another document that I have put together that does have what's outstanding as well.
That would be really helpful. Thank you.
Any additional questions from council members?
Yeah, I guess
Go ahead,
I
Mitch.
have one. Sorry, is there an echo? Is that can I ask it, President Melendez?
Mitch, go ahead. Sorry.
So, Commander LaFave, I'm wondering if you mind sharing what are the things, because it's a very, very dense document. What are the things in there that you, other than being able to kind of check things off, what are the things that you have the most kind of energy about, and what are the things that you're most concerned about in terms of being able to accomplish? And I'd also just ask if you were able to talk with any other police departments across the state who all had their own EO 203 process, if there's any kind of best practices or things like that to describe.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm very happy about was that initially under the items that were not funded was Officer Wellness Program. And under the EO 203, there were 10 action items that were under that category. And we've actually been able to wipe out that entire category with the formation of our Officer Wellness and Resilience Unit. So that was a chunk that I was able to pull from the in progress to the completed pile, which has helped. Councilman Gruber, I didn't get a chance to really reach out to any other agencies on this particular thing. because I was so focused on what we could do. And there were so many different items. And one of the biggest obstacles that we had was that when we made estimates for the categories that weren't being addressed, there was like a $7.8 million deficit to address those. So obviously that was going to take some time to chip away at that, while at the same time being able to meet the requirements of these recommendations. And one of the first ones that I was able to remove from that deficit list was the officer wellness program, which I believe had an estimated cost of $311,000 per year, which we were able to overcome.
I think what would be really helpful, from my perspective at least, thinking about obviously budgeting cost is a thing that you have to consider, but there are a lot of things that we talked about with EO 203 that should not have a budgetary impact. Things like changing policies and practices shouldn't have a budgetary impact, or if they do, it's a little more complicated to be able to see the whole picture there. I think it'd be really helpful to be able to split out. I agree with Councilmember Lupien. I think we absolutely need to see some more, information in terms of a list of where we are in some of these things. It'd be great to see from you, Commander Lefebvre, where you see budget as a barrier, and where you see just kind of time and will as a barrier. And I'm hopeful that we can all work together to address both of them.
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that. And I'd be more than happy to pass on any information. But I can tell you just off the top of my head, for being so involved in this for so long, the data technology and transparency, there were like 25 or 24 different action items that there were a lot of obstacles in there for just to get the actual technology up to date to where we needed to be, and be able to make some of the data portal changes that are required, and hire the staff that OBI would have to require. It was like a $2.5 million price tag. It was quite robust. So, and I know that there has been some work back channeling to secure some maybe alternative funding to help move that project as well. So that's kind of an in progress type thing. But due to the large scale and scope of this, like I said, I'd be more than happy to get more specific. And I think to have a better discussion would probably be to take the outstanding items and the budgetary ones and just kind of break them down versus everything else that's sitting out there. It's just, we could get lost in talking points.
Can I interrupt 1 second? Can we switch interpreters? Donna is here. Barrett, the spotlight. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Gruber.
Thank you.
Gruber, are you done with the questions?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot more, but I think they'll be addressed when we start to kind of pour through the list. So I hope that can be a pretty quick follow-up from RPD with a little more granular detail there. But I appreciate it, Commander.
Yeah, I have it, but just to not like overwhelm people with just throwing pages and pages of documentation, if we have a more specific conversation, it's easy for me to cut or pull the data and be able to have a conversation about it.
Councilmember Lightfoot.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I would like to offer for consideration as you begin to pull out that list as far as more detail, that we can begin to look at what opportunities have already been had as far as it relates to the ARPA funds and dollars and usage of some of that funds, how some of the things that have been completed have been funded, and or potential funding opportunities or advocacy opportunities for projects that are still pending. And I say that as it relates to advocacy part, because I know in both working on Executive Order 203 and Race Commission, that some of these areas, like as you said earlier, did fall into other municipalities or needing to be helped by, state funding and or federal funding, et cetera. So, I sit on the National League of Cities policy committee for policing or for public safety. And, we have up and coming meetings, that we're having with police or elected officials all over the country who are grappling with the same challenge of putting these types of reforms and projects in place as it relates to their police departments across the country. So if and when putting that together, if there are opportunities to look at where funding and budgeting is a barrier, could you identify areas of advocacy where we as elected officials can advocate on a federal level for assistance as it relates to certain particular categories that are unfinished and unbudgeted and don't really see an opportunity for budgeting in this cycle or future? But also, can we attach opportunities or potential opportunities for the one-time ARPA funds to potentially help or assist, but in not to overcomplicate things? But I'm sure that there are areas out of those, let's say, 25 things that aren't done or et cetera, whatever it was, that there may be 5 or 10 that says, we just don't have, we'll never have the money for that, or we're not going to have much, but it's very important. And then we can work collaboratively, meaning we as elected officials in the spaces that we're in to advocate for more dollars to municipalities as it relates to police departments for those types of initiatives. So I'd like to see that kind of flushed out in the document as well too. How the things that have been done and how they relate to current or existing or past funding, ARPA dollar expenses or ties to particular projects that have already been done or about to be done, and or future opportunities for advocacy funding to assist in getting other projects off the ground. I hope that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd like to build off of something Councilmember Lightfoot said. I think for us as a body, it would be helpful to get all of the information in terms of what's going on with EO 203. So I'm not interested in the abridged version. I think we can digest it and decide, if there's pieces that we want to help move. And the reason I say that is because, for many of us, we sat in the Zoom squares for a long time going through that document and coming up with recommendations and reviewing it. And we just want to help lift the work too. And I think there's opportunities that are going to come before us, probably in the next 6 to 12 months, that it would be helpful to know what progress has already been made on the department side so that we can also be aware if a council item comes to us in the future, we're prepared with the updates from your end. So I guess I would say, put it in whatever format you think makes the most sense, but, give us the longer version of what's going on, so we're well aware of what's happening.
Yeah, and I would just like to say, kudos to Chief Harriet and Chief Smith for, despite, obvious, budgetary constraints, they did everything they could to get us to a very good spot of having 56 of our 78 completed. So, kudos to both of them for pushing that forward. They did a great job.
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Chief Smith and former chief as well. Is there any other additional questions pertaining to Executive Order 203 before we move on? Okay, hearing none, we will move into a discussion around asset forfeiture funds, and we'll let RPD come off camera, and I'm not sure who's taking the lead on this discussion, but.
That would be me. I'm going to try and bring up my presentation if I could.
Yes, thank you.
Do you have? Is there a Rochester Police Department asset forfeiture slide on your screens, please?
Not yet, no.
to the host. Is there a possibility that I can be allowed to share my screen here, please?
Yeah, you have permission. Let me try one more thing. Try now.
I am seeing it, but I can't get it to show up for you folks.
Can I try one thing, Katie?
Yep.
John, try again now?
What I'm going to do is shut this down and try to start the presentation again. Yeah, I'm just not able to bring it up here.
It's not showing that you're sharing your screen. You might have to click, once you've selected the screen, click share on the window that comes up in the lower right-hand corner.
Oh, I apologize, folks. Please bear with me.
Should be a green share screen arrow on the Zoom window. There we go.
Anything show up there?
Yes.
Okay. I apologize for that. All right. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Kuhnman. I'm captain assigned to the Special Investigations section. I was asked to put together a presentation to kind of give an overview of asset forfeiture, the program in general, and how we use it, and what it means for us and seizures and how we process things. Also on the call with me are Lieutenant Mark Simmons and Lieutenant Jeremy Anzalone, who are also assigned to Special Investigations section. I may defer to them for additional information, but I think that we put together a pretty comprehensive slideshow here. It's very general. As you can imagine, it's an extremely complex program with a lot of nuances. So we kind of really focused on what it means specifically for us locally. And without getting into a whole heck of a lot of information, there are informative slides that kind of give the general presentation and will help us understand. Most of the slides, the information that you will see, were taken right out of the Department of Justice's 2021 Asset Forfeiture Policy Manual. And that is publicly available for anybody who does want to see it. And that can be found online. There's going to be a lot of stuff presented. So if I'm going to try and roll through, we'll hopefully be done in about 20 to 25 minutes. If we could check out the whole slideshow, and maybe it'll answer some of the questions that may pop up, and we'll have a question and answer period toward the end, if that's all right. All right, so going through, what we'll be talking about is an overview of asset forfeiture in general terms, the forfeiture processes and how it relates to the Rochester Police Department. We'll talk about accountability and oversight of the asset forfeiture program. We'll discuss some of the permissible uses of the funds, how they're requested, and then we'll wrap up with some key takeaways and some of the important points, along with some questions if there are any. Asset forfeiture is a critical legal tool that serves several compelling law enforcement purposes. It's designed to deprive criminals of the proceeds of their crimes, to break the financial background of organized criminal syndicates and drug cartels, and to recover property that may be used to compensate victims and to deter crime. As stated by the Department of Justice, the program mission really is to use asset forfeiture as a tool to deter, disrupt, and dismantle criminal enterprises denying them the instruments and the proceeds from criminal activity. I really want to underscore as I talk through this that the Rochester Police Department really focuses on the criminal piece here in terms of seizing assets from anybody. And I'll get into more specifics as we go through, but I want to try to make sure that everybody on the call understands that it's a very structured process. There are a lot of safeguards in place to make sure that it's done the right way and to protect innocent folks from having assets recovered that they can't get access back to. So there are three types of criminal or of asset forfeiture, excuse me. Criminal asset forfeiture, civil judicial, and administrative. Criminal asset forfeiture is an action against a person. That's somebody who's been arrested, somebody who's been charged, and that notice includes, that process, that action includes notice of intent to forfeit property in a criminal indictment. A criminal conviction is required in order for forfeiture to go through. So forfeiture could very likely be part of a defendant's sentence. And that could be something that's worked out at the end of a trial on a guilty finding, or it could be something that is arranged and agreed to by way of a plea arrangement. Criminal forfeiture is limited to the property interests of the defendant only, including any proceeds earned by the defendant's illegal activity. And the government has to establish by a preponderance of the evidence the requisite connection between the crime of conviction and the actual asset being forfeited. Okay, civil judicial asset forfeiture, the second type. This is an action against property. Court proceedings brought against property that was derived from or used to commit an offense rather than against a person who committed an offense. Unlike criminal forfeiture, there is no criminal conviction required, but the important piece to pull from this is that the federal government is still required to prove in court that the property was linked to criminal activity. Civil forfeiture also permits recovery of assets held by possibly deceased defendants or where people cannot be identified as defendants, unclaimed funds, and so on. So in a civil forfeiture case, the government is the actual plaintiff. The property becomes the defendant, and any person who claims interest in the property is a claimant. And as I go through this presentation, you'll understand that there are several different ways for people to become claimants of property and have a chance at proving legitimacy of funds. And the third one is administrative asset forfeiture. This also is an action against property. This action permits property to be forfeited to the United States without filing a case in federal court. Administrative forfeiture process occurs before the agency that seized the assets when no one has filed a claim contesting the seizure. There are, again, many procedures in place, including strict time limits and noticing requirements designed to protect the interests and rights of property holders. It's important to note here that any seizure of property subject to administrative forfeiture must be based upon probable cause. The administrative asset forfeiture is the primary method that we utilize in communicating with the federal government to process funds that we've seized due to criminal activity. Just to give a quick snapshot of what the RPD asset forfeiture looks like for 2021 alone, 170 search warrants were served. Out of those 170 search warrants, 464 individual property lots were obtained. Now, that could be a lot with multiple items. It could be a separate lot for perhaps a weapon, a stack of money, and then a separate lot for other property that would have been seized during one of these search warrants. So from those 170 search warrants, 68 applications went forward for asset forfeiture, 62 of which were accepted by the federal government and processed. Now, from those 68 applications for asset forfeiture, 63 came from criminal search warrants, and there were 5 that remained that were just recovered property. And those pieces of recovered property, when there was funds that were recovered, there were also drugs associated with that property. I think it's really important to drive that home. In terms of the property lots, also there were 140 firearms seized, which equates to roughly 17% of that overall number of what was turned in as a result of those search warrants.
Can I ask a quick question? Oh, you wanted questions at the end, right?
If you don't mind, I may be able to answer it along the way, but I'll do whatever.
I'll hold on to it.
Thanks. All right, so this is just a very quick peek at how the process works. I apologize if it's showing up on your screen kind of small, but there are a lot of different bubbles as you see in this flow chart. The asset forfeiture process, it starts with developing the case and getting probable cause. And then whether it's property or whether it's cash, there are different ways that it can go. So process that we use will go along this top line here. We don't seize anybody's property unless it meets a $5,000 threshold. And if we, for instance, do a search warrant and we recover money that's associated with the drugs that's in excess of $5,000, then we will reach out and put paperwork together and solicit the federal government to do an asset forfeiture. And this is kind of the flow chart on how that works. Now, as it moves through the process, one of the things that has to happen is people have to be aware that a forfeiture proceeding has begun. So people are notified. Anybody identified as having been associated with that money is contacted. If there is a claim, that process stops. Somebody reaches out to the seizing agency and makes a claim on that cash and says, that's mine. Hold up, how do I get it back? The process then stops. And what happens is it now goes over to the judicial forfeiture side, where one of 3 things can happen. It can go under civil forfeiture, it can go under the criminal forfeiture, or the assistant U.S. attorney will just decline altogether. So what happens is a valid claim will be vetted, and if it can be shown, then what happens is the forfeiture process stops and that money can be returned to folks. And it'll be a little bit clearer after this next slide, which is citizen recovery rights. A claimant has to file a claim with the seizing agency within 35 days of a mailing notice or 30 days of the end of a publication of notice. A valid claim has to identify the property that was claimed. It has to state the claimant's interest in that property, and it also has to be made under oath. If a valid claim isn't filed, the agency declares the property administratively forfeited, and it moves further through that process. Complaint processing. If a complaint is filed, the agency has to stop the administrative forfeiture proceeding and refer the matter to the prosecutor. The prosecutor has to then file a complaint or include the property in an indictment or information to initiate a judicial forfeiture action within 90 days. If that does not happen within that 90 days, if the prosecutor fails to do those things or is unable to get an extension, that means that the property gets returned and the process stops. There is no forfeiture moving forward on that particular thing. Time limits can potentially be extended by a court order. As far as accountability and oversight, the Office of Public Integrity actually conducted an audit on our asset forfeiture process. They did this just as recently as 2021. The results of the review indicated that adequate internal control procedures over the federal forfeiture proceeds and compliance with prescribed policies. There were no adverse findings during that review. So that lets you know that as far as the forfeiture process goes, with what the city police department does in terms of going through the process, maintaining the funds, utilizing the funds, requesting the funds, and so on, everything has been to this point above board and noted. The Department of Justice also, as it's their policy or their program, they also have an audit procedure. And as we speak, there's a current audit procedure going on with the Rochester Police Department, although I cannot speak to the process as how far where they are in the process, excuse me. I can tell you that that's happening as we speak. And as you all know, the Rochester City Council has fiduciary review and approval for all asset forfeiture expenditures. So our process, once we have a security asset forfeiture through the equitable sharing program, it goes into asset forfeiture funds. If we want to use any of that money, correspondence has to go through the chain of command. The request has to be vetted all the way up to the chief of police, who will then move it over toward the mayor's office and ultimate say so with city council. Some of the uses that are permitted by law enforcement for asset forfeiture are on this slide. We certainly don't utilize all of them. But some of the noteworthy things that we do, operations and investigations, we will certainly try to take advantage of that money so that we can further operations and investigations. Purchasing police equipment can also be utilized. The next bullet down, joint law enforcement, public safety operations. I'll touch a little bit further on that on the next slide, but there's a lot of good uses that this money can be put toward, and I think it's important to highlight that. Community-based support uses, transfers of shared funds from state or local law enforcement agency to a community-based nonprofit organization. That's one of the options that we have in terms of using asset forfeiture monies. Their missions need to be supportive and consistent with law enforcement effort, policy, or initiative. An agency can expend up to a total of $25,000 annually to transfer to those types of organizations. And the bottom bullet there talks about recent examples of how we've utilized some asset forfeiture funds. They include Teen Court, Rock Anti-Violence Coalition, Crime Stoppers, and Bavona. Now, just for a point of clarification, that doesn't mean that $25,000 can go to each one of those. $25,000 is the actual cap, and those are the $25,000, excuse me, has to be divvied up as determined by the department and council. Some of the key takeaways: RPD seized funds from individuals who are suspected to be engaged in criminal activity. To that point, 92% of our 2021 seizures were the result of search warrants, where we had documentation, established probable cause, and had a court-ordered warrant to go in and search for property and contraband and arrest people for illegal activity. I really want to make sure that everybody understands the priorities of our police department and special investigations section in terms of serving these search warrants. Human life is the first and foremost. And when we go through a door, we take this very, very seriously. We build our cases in a way so that we have the best possible results, that will have better positive results on our neighborhoods, and so that we can build a strong case and hopefully put an end to that particular drug network, if you will. I also want to point out something that's, we've been having these discussions in our shop, and I really want to drive the point home. Drug offenses are not victimless crimes, and I think that's part of our mission as the Rochester Police Department. Our guys directly deal with the victims that are victims of drug offenses. And victims of drug offenses take many shapes, as you all know. But some of the awful things that we deal with are the violence that's associated with. And coming out of our shop, when we prioritize the investigations that we put together, we prioritize them in such a manner that first and foremost, it's violence. If we have a violent area or individuals where stuff is taking place and there is a drug nexus that we've got intelligence on, that now becomes our first priority. Beyond that, we take a listen to neighborhood complaints, and some neighborhood complaints come in a lot more heavier than other ones, and so that prompts us to take a deeper look. And when we can establish that quality of life has been affected in a particular neighborhood, we get complaints through council, through the mayor's office, through the chief's office, all those different places. We have to look at that stuff, and that's all part of our prioritization. And I'm saying this because I really want you to understand that our search warrants, that's what the result of our investigations is. And that's how we can go about trying to take down these people, these offenders, and these drug houses that are plaguing the neighborhoods. So going with the victimless crime piece, you've got associated gun violence, you've got litter in neighborhoods, you've got drug houses where you may have syringes and other paraphernalia from the drug houses there. You've got children that can't go out of their houses and play in certain neighborhoods and circumstances. And it's important to us to go ahead and try to get in front of that stuff. Overdoses. I didn't talk really much about overdoses, but I'd like to highlight it. That drives a lot of our investigations because of the opioid crisis and the people that are dying and don't need to be dying. And what we do is we try to go after those locations that we can identify that are serving up product illegally and causing people to have medical crises or deaths. And that only doesn't affect that victim, it also affects their families and shatters. Probably everybody on this call has some sort of tie to somebody who has overdosed from opioids, and it's tragic, it really is. I just wanted to really drive that point home. The search warrants, we take them real serious. That's where the bulk of everything that we go after comes from. We're not just willy-nilly about going out and grabbing up people's money and trying to take it from them. We go through the process, and there's a lot of safeguards in place to ensure that we do that. And when that process does happen, there's plenty of safeguards with the federal program where people can make a claim and people can say, that's my money, it's legit, it's got nothing to do with drug activity, and there are processes to be able to demonstrate that and stop the process.
So I'll open the floor to Vice President Lupien.
I do have a number of questions, so I'll ask a few and then I'll let my colleagues jump in and then ask the rest. First one, can you go back to the slide where you had kind of the breakdown of the asset forfeiture lots?
Yeah, boy. Is it on there?
No.
Yep, give me 2 seconds, I'll bring it back up.
Thank you. Yeah, that's the one.
Can you see it?
Yes.
Full screen?
It's it looks like it's on note view right now, but I can see it. So my question is,
Go ahead.
around the, that's okay, around the numbers. So 464 property lots.
Yes.
But there were only 68 applications for asset forfeiture.
Correct.
And then looking at the breakdown, 60% of the lots were drugs.
Yes.
So were there no applications because they were illegal and it was destroyed for the drugs? I guess the numbers don't add up for me.
No, that's a good question. And what we do is just because we take in certain property lots doesn't mean that it's necessarily eligible for forfeiture. Things could be well below that threshold of $5,000, and or my asset forfeiture specialist reviews the case paperwork and decides that it's not worthy of a forfeiture. Are you trying to get my attention, Donna?
I think she's an interpreter. But
Yes.
this is Lieutenant Simmons. I just want to add one more thing to what the captain is saying here. Is out of the 464 property lots, for those applications, they may yield more than one property lot. So it's not a one-for-one proposition. So if we go to a
Okay.
search warrant, we may be able to recover guns, drugs, and money, which would be 3 separate property lots for that one application. So even though for firearms it says 78 lots, we actually recovered, let's see the number here, 140 firearms was actually recovered, but it was multiple firearms at one location, which only yielded 78 property lots.
Okay, and is a lot an individual piece of property or that can be more than one thing too?
Correct.
It can be more than one?
Yes, it can be one property type, but say drugs
see.
could be one lot, but it could be a kilo, or
Got it.
guns can be one lot, but it could be 5 guns.
Okay, okay. And so then my next question is, with things, it looks like you apply for asset forfeiture if it's above 5,000 or below 500,000. And so when it's below 5,000 or in the occasion it's above 500, what happens then to the property?
Well, if it's below 5,000, we just don't attempt to seize it. It stays in our property, and people can, if somebody can claim ownership to it, they can come here and get it out. It's not going through the asset forfeiture process. It doesn't meet the threshold. Yep.
So seizing is an official process, but
Yes, it is.
holding on to it, the department can, in essence, seize it, meaning like to take it and hold it
Yes.
and not go through the process. So what happens to those items?
Are you speaking specifically like cash or with evidence?
I guess I'm not really sure what would consist, if it's below $5,000.
Yep.
I understand drugs, right? Like those are illegal. Those are probably getting destroyed. No one's going to claim their heroin, but
Right.
for, I don't really know what kinds of objects get taken other than guns and drugs and cash.
Right. So there are different things that happen with we can hold stuff for safekeeping. If we recover property and goes into the property clerk's office, safekeeping, whether we have an identified owner or don't, and this would apply to funds taken as well that don't meet that $5,000 threshold. So it can be put into the property clerk's office as evidence, as safekeeping, or for destruction. Those are the 3 typical things that property gets processed as. If it's evidence, if it's above that threshold, we will apply for asset forfeiture. If it does not meet that threshold, it stays here and is available for retrieval from somebody who can establish ownership of it. And that goes with any property for safekeeping.
Okay. And then
I hope I'm answering your question adequately.
yeah, and then maybe the last question I'll ask before I give up the floor. What is the process like for claiming property, whether it be through asset forfeiture or safekeeping?
Well, asset forfeiture, as I said, the federal government, when they begin this process, they're mandated to notify somebody. If we arrest people in a house and take that money and it goes into asset forfeiture process, the federal government becomes, they're the ones doing the processing of that money and the asset forfeiture. So they reach out to addresses that are given. If somebody happens to be incarcerated, they contact the jail or the other facility that they might be at to let them know that this money is being processed for asset forfeiture, giving people an opportunity. There's also a website. I don't know exactly what it's called, but there's a website that the feds put up. Has everything to do with forfeitures, and people can go on there and find either a location or the particular property that was taken by the police department and is now in that forfeiture process and make a claim for it.
Hey Cap, it's this is Lieutenant Anzalone.
Yes.
So that website that people can go to claim their property is www.forfeiture.gov. And if you
Thank
go
you.
on that website, you can see all items that are subject to asset forfeiture right now. And people can click a link on that website to file a claim online. So that's another way they can do it.
Thank you.
Just one question as it pertains to vehicles. I see that's one of the items on here. In terms of forfeiture for a vehicle, what goes into that process? Is that simply, the vehicle is known to be involved in a case or known to be involved in drug sales, or what goes into that?
Yeah, no, I would ask my asset forfeiture specialist to chime in, but I'll get us started with the process. It's pretty much treated the exact same way, and we aren't able to seize that asset. It has to be done through the federal government. So the paperwork is processed that it's been tied to, and again, we take that very seriously. We have to establish a connection between the drug offense and that particular vehicle if we are looking to seize it. And then there's a whole lot of things that go into it, like establishing who is the actual rightful owner of that vehicle. Is there a lien against it? There are a lot of parts that apply, but it can ultimately be the same process, and the federal government would process a seizure, and then it would be available to take if we wanted to pay for such and make it part of our fleet. Not everything really kind of flows that easily, though. Scott, anything to add on that?
Captain, I can tell you in 2021, we did not seize any vehicles. Typically, when we would seize a vehicle, it would be something like we would order up from a dealer. He would deliver us the drugs using that vehicle. If it's, if there's no lien on it and it's a vehicle of some kind of value, that we might look at it. But generally, a lot of times it's not worth us taking the time for processing and seizing the vehicle.
Thanks, Scott.
Questions from council members? Okay, hearing none.
I have more.
Okay, VP, floor is yours.
I guess I'm seeing that difference here, that seizing and taking property are different. And so to President Melendez's question, if a car is taken, it would be taken to the tow lot then, and someone would have to claim it from there?
Yeah, Scott would be
Even
better
if it's
able
not
to
seized?
answer that, but initially, yeah, what would happen is we would tow it, we would take it here, and then depending on if it was going to be processed, it would go to a federal holding site. Scott, am I accurate on that?
Yes, we generally keep the vehicles here. If we do not put a hold on it for either evidence or for seizure, then the registered owner is sent a letter from our auto pound telling them the vehicle is an impound and explaining them how they can get it back.
Okay, thank you. On one of the other slides, it said 92% of the seizures were for search warrants. So those, just want to clarify, those are signed by a judge going into someone's property. It's not, a car search.
Every time, yes. It could be
Okay.
it could be a search warrant on a vehicle, but the lion's share are definitely houses.
Okay, and then so the remaining 8%, do you have an idea of when those seizures happen?
Yeah, again, it goes back a couple of slides to where we had that percentage that are not going to be applied for or are denied for whatever reason. I'm not sure I'm
Oh, so
answering your question properly.
the 92% were of seizures are signed search warrants. So the other
Yes.
8%, how is property seized in those instances? Does that make sense?
Okay, so yeah, those would be basically recovered property or something that may have taken place on the street. I can remember one instance where somebody fled from a car or something and had like $8,000 on them. There was no search warrant. The money was discarded in the course of fleeing from that car. So the police took it and logged it into property. Nobody ever claimed it. So that would be that type of instance.
Okay, but so that would have been an administrative seizure?
All of our seizures start out on the administrative side. So
Mhm.
yes.
Okay. I think maybe my last question, I'll let you guys go. You know what, on the slides where you talked about the different kinds of seizure, you said the criminal was preponderance of evidence, or if I said that right, which is a very high legal standard. And then civil is a lower standard. I don't remember exactly how it's phrased. But for the evidence that needs to be provided to prove, you know, either that it's a criminal case against a person or, you know, for the civil against the property, what kind of evidence needs to be provided? You know, is it just an officer stating what they saw? Is that enough evidence, or does there need to be some other kind of evidence that the property was used in a crime?
Well, I have to fall on the sword and be honest. I can't answer that question only because it all depends on the amount of evidence, the way it's presented, and what's allowed into the courts and so on. So
Mhm.
to answer your question, the bulk of the information that's provided every time we do a asset forfeiture proceeding, Scott there puts together a case package. He puts together search warrants. He puts together every piece of information so that the judicial proceedings, if there are any, or the administrative seizures, the information is there for the federal government to be able to review and to be able to vet and to be able to weigh it against what people are telling them if they do make a claim for the property.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we're up against our time here, so I just want to thank RPD for the updates on both fronts. And we look forward to receiving more information on the Executive Order 203, as well as, you know, if we have additional questions with asset forfeiture, we will follow up. So thank you all for your time and have a good night.
Thank you.